So we will have a panel discussion with 3 participants. Please welcome them up on stage with a big round of applause, and I will present them. You already know Benoît. Welcome back, Benoît. And we also have Ulla Hamilton, who's Vice Mayor of the City of Stockholm. Welcome, Ulla. And we also have Crister Matsson, who is Senior Advisor at the Research Institute Acreo Swedish ICT. Thank you very much for helping me with this small rearrangement here. Welcome, Ulla and Crister.
Thank you so much.
And Benoît, of course.
I just want to say something in Swedish.
Okay, go ahead.
You presented me as senior advisor. To all your Swedes, that means gammal rådgivare.
Yeah, well, that means senior advisor, basically.
Inte före detta dock.
Distinguished advisor, maybe. Anyway, we will discuss here a bit. We will pick up some threads from what we have been talking about earlier this morning, and we will also look ahead to what the EU can learn and do to become even better in this area. Now, Ulla, you're Vice Mayor of Stockholm, and Stockholm has got a lot of praise today, and Stockholm often show up very high in rankings. What is your explanation to the success?
I think that we are lucky because we started early and found actually the right way of providing open fiber access in Stockholm, and that was really lucky because it wasn't obvious that we should actually find that business idea, and we had all politicians stood behind the company idea, and some understood, some didn't understand the power in the business idea, but today I think everyone understands the power of the business idea of today, and we can see this is actually the reason why Stockholm is on top of the agenda when people talk about ICT. It's the reason why we have one of the world's hottest ICT hubs in Kista. Is the reason why we have all this gaming industry booming in the greater Stockholm area, and it has also led to that Stockholmers are very, very trendy, using smartphones, and so it has really led to that we are technical freaks here in Stockholm as a citizen, but and it has been very important, and the way that we've done that, it has also led to that you actually have quite a lot of hundreds of companies that actually is providing services via the open fiber network, and I think that's really, really important, and it's an important history to tell when we're talking about how to actually develop the infrastructure in other parts of the world.
So you're talking about luck. Anders, in the beginning of the morning, Anders was also talking about luck. Luck and mad entrepreneurs, I think, was what he used as key success factors. It sounds a bit, well, it's nice to have luck, but luck also comes when you work correctly. Is that so? Or should you just, if you just wait to see when the luck comes? How do you do that?
No, I think that because I was vice chairman of the company in 1995, when we actually discussed the business ideas and so on, and that was really, really hard to decide because we didn't know. But you have to understand the incentives from a business point of view, because I think it's very, very, very important to provide the possibilities for companies to develop their business ideas. So, and from that point of view, it's quite obvious that it shouldn't be the city that actually should provide the specific services. Our business idea should be to actually provide the infrastructure.
Which is what you're doing.
Yeah, and that's what we're doing. So, of course, it wasn't only luck, but you have to have a very thorough thought about what's the actually core business from the city point of view, and how we to avoid to do in order to stimulate companies to develop services.
Because you've chosen quite a different path, the Stockholm city, from Sweden as a whole. Stokab has a different business model than Telia, who is the incumbent in Sweden. What?
That's pity for all the rest.
It has been so far. Why is this difference?
I don't know actually, because we have, and this is I quite recently read a very interesting report from Deloitte, and where they presented that we have several state-owned companies in Sweden that actually have the infrastructure, but they are not connected. So we have a lot of different state-owned companies that actually provide infrastructure on different levels, also with services and so on. And I think it's really important that from a government point of view to actually consider, do we actually use these investments in the best way when we have 6, 7 or 8 different state-owned providers? Or should we actually, as in New Zealand, for example, see to that we have one company, a national Stokab, for example, that actually can provide the infrastructure by cutting away those services from these different kinds of state-owned.
Then you have several service companies providing. What do you say about this idea, Benoît? Would it be a good idea?
Sorry. I'm a big believer in structural separation. And actually, I think structural separation solves a lot of the problems that the industry has today. The first one is competition, because whether we like it or not, incumbent operators, even when they're forced to open their networks, are still, giving preferential treatment to their own operations.
Behaving as monopolists anyway.
Well, I mean, I don't want to paint them as, the evil guys, but it's just natural that people who have worked together for dozens of years, if you're in the commercial side and your customer has an issue, you could go through the official process, or you could pick up your phone or walk down the corridor and go and see your colleague and say, can you speed this up? And this is exactly what happens, and we know it because when these things are actually measured in terms of quality of service between different operators, we see that the incumbent is systematically treated preferentially. So we know that there is a competition issue that remains. I often joke about this, and I'm not going to name the company, but there's one incumbent in Europe. There are several, so you won't know which one I'm talking about. There's an incumbent in Europe that is functionally separated, which means that the wholesale division and the retail division are supposed to be 2 separate entities, but they still belong to the same company. And every time as an analyst that I was invited to speak to the infrastructure company, they had one of their counterparts from the service company in the room. And every time I made the same joke, I said, are we waiting for your other customers as well before we start? and I mean, it's just the fact of life. This is how these companies operate. It's a long history of culture. But so there's another issue.
Structural separation in theory, but not really in practice.
That's why it's called functional separation, absolutely.
Functional.
Yeah. But we have a bigger problem in Europe at large, and that is the investment issue that's been discussed at the conference a lot these last few days. The incumbent operators are the only ones who have the capacity to invest, and they are the ones who have the least incentive to do so. And Sweden is a very atypical market in that respect, because the cities have created competition for the incumbent. So the incumbent now has to invest, because otherwise they're out of the market. But that's not the case in every other country in Europe. There are very few countries where that dynamic exists. And part of the issue is that on the financial side, we have companies that are very comfortable funding infrastructure projects. They don't want to touch operators, because an operator is not an infrastructure company. Structurally, an infrastructure company delivers steady returns over 40 years. It's a very predictable business, and that's what they want to invest in. A telecom operator is absolutely not that. And so the funding can't go into the vessels because they're not infrastructure companies. If we implemented structural separation, we would see that it becomes a lot easier to finance these long-term projects from the infrastructure company, and we get equal competition from the service companies. So I think it's an absolutely virtuous model. But back to one of the points Christopher was making, even though our telecom lobbyists don't have as much money as Comcast, they have a lot of money, and they're very present in
They're
Brussels
powerful
and
still.
pushing to every politician out there the idea that it's a horrible idea, it's going to destroy employment, it's going to make services worse. And, you know, politicians listen to what they're told, and if no one else tells them the opposite side of the story, they're going to buy it.
But you are telling them the opposite side of
Yeah, but I don't have the money that they have.
All right.
No, but I mean, it's literally as simple as that. You know, Etno is a very powerful lobbying organization in Brussels, and MPs listen to them. And incumbents in every country are very big employers. You just have to listen to how Orange or BT talk to the government. Every time there's a piece of regulation coming through they don't like, the CEO comes, does an interview, and says, yes, fine, we will do it. Unfortunately, we'll have to fire 5,000 people. And immediately the government says, well, wait a minute, maybe we can find a way. And so all of that comes from the market structure. So I absolutely believe, I guess if I can just finish on that topic with a slightly whimsical comment, I wonder how Stokab would react if there was a national infrastructure company that they had to be folded into, because there's a lot of pride from Stokab in what they have achieved.
Yes.
But if you separate the market so that you have an infrastructure monopoly, then you only have one company nationwide, so there's no more Stokab.
What do you think about that, Ulla?
That's a very interesting question. No, but of course we have to consider that. But I think it's today we have a situation where we actually would like to have a better infrastructure in the whole country, because that was also would also be quite good for companies in Stockholm, because today we have a situation where because we need fiber broadband not only in Sweden, all over the world, I think, because we have a lot of very, very smart companies that actually is developing ideas and products that's being used and that actually need a good infrastructure. So if we can see to that the infrastructure will be developed all over the world, that would also be good for companies in Stockholm. So that would be good for Stockholm as well.
Crister, you've written a report on Stokab where you actually say that the profit for the community is 16 billion Swedish crowns.
I didn't wrote it on my own. It's my colleague Marco Forsati that make all the calculation, but I took part in it. Yes, we are working on a research institute that is technically oriented. We have hundreds of people that knows a lot about technical issues. So we started to think, wouldn't it be interesting to see after the fiber has been deployed, how does people's lives change? Could we track and measure things? We made a pre-study for the government's broadband forum to see, is it possible to do this? Could we see some evidence? And of course you can argue, and I know someone that really wants to do that from time to time, but the idea was, is it possible to do this? Could we have true figures? And then we were asked by Stokab to see, could we do something similar in Stockholm to see, have these 20 years caused any socioeconomic benefit for the city and the citizens? And of course, there would be hundreds of examples, but it's quite difficult to make the calculation. So we found a few of them, and we could see really clear that it is a good investment. It is really a good investment. The problem might be that it's not the investor that got the return of the investment, but in the total situation of socioeconomy, it's really good. You can get 3 times back of this money. And for example, to reduce the prices for individuals, small and medium enterprises, and for the city. And I think that is something that we miss in Europe. We are writing today a guide, my colleague Marco and I, a guide for the European Commission, which should be handed over to all the regions in Europe, because they want them to fulfill the goals in the digital agenda, and they will not. There's just one country that will achieve these goals, and that's Sweden. All the others are lacking behind.
So what are they lacking behind on? What are the biggest obstacles?
I mean, there is a lot of things in this digital agenda, but when it comes to uptake and speed and prices and all that, it's not really good. We are also contracted to do reviews in some of these European regions, and it's quite simple. It's just a 0 when we try to do a review. They don't have done too much. And we can see, you can see in countries, as Benoît mentioned, where you have strong incumbents, the prices are high, the capacity are low. How come? These companies have so much money. And now they have found a good idea. They go to the commission and said, we can't roll out in this rural or remote place. We need some gap funding, which means that they want the government to give them money so they can be monopolists even in these places with the taxpayers' money. I'm not sure if that was the purpose with the European Union to support that, but that
probably
is
not.
No, probably not. But that is one of the problems. But there was one main question in this program: what could Europe learn from Sweden? And I think something that we can learn that also Ulla mentioned before. Here, it's not a telecom question, because what we hear in Europe is that this should mainly be driven by the market. Here it was an infrastructure question, a city planning question. And of course, telecom is an important part of all the users. But the biggest user of all kind are the public administration.
So making it a broader question, moving from telecommunications to city planning, infrastructure.
Yeah, infrastructure for society, society at large.
Because if I might add something, when we discussed the business idea in the mid-1990s, there was also one important part of that, and that was that Telia was the monopolist on the market. So we wanted to find a business idea that actually forced them also to open their access, open access to other providers, and they actually did that a couple of years later. But so this is also a very important part of it, and from the city's point of view. If we're talking about today, of course, we have actually developed a lot of services from the city's point of view that, of course, have reduced the cost from the city's point of view, and also led to that Stockholm has had easy access 24 hours to a lot of services that they didn't have before. So when we were talking about these 40 megabit accessibility, I think it's important to show people what they actually can get if you have a high capacity in the network. And Stockholm is a very good example of that, because if you don't know that you can get it, you don't ask for it either. But if you can see that it's possible, then you will definitely have the consumers that's asking for the
comes.
We can hear this quite often in Brussels, where the incumbents always say there is no demand for high speed, there is no one that asks for fibre.
That earlier on stage.
And of course they listen, because they're a huge company, sometimes partly owned by the government and so on. But what we have seen from our studies is when you have the infrastructure and the high speed available, something happens. Entrepreneurs shows up and say, hey, here's a high speed road. I can deliver my excellent services. But they will never even think of doing that on a lousy copper network.
That's true.
Benoît.
There's one thing I want to point out, because this idea of how do you make Stokab happen on a broader basis has been at the heart of my research ever since I started looking into Stokab. And the replicability of the model, especially at a European level, there's two things that, I mean, you were very humble in saying it was luck, but the reality is it was a combination in my mind of luck, pragmatism, and political sanity. And these last two, I'm sorry, but we can't get them in Brussels. And
the political sanity is lacking.
No, but that's the point. I sat and talked with both sides of the aisle who were, making that decision politically in '93 when the project was voted in, and it wasn't a political issue. It was city development. Of course, we're going to vote together on this. It's not because it's coming from the other side that we're going to vote against, but. There are very few countries in Europe, I'm not saying at local level, but certainly at national level, where you can even imagine that kind of decision. In France, the right wing will never, ever vote anything that the left wing puts forward unless it's going to war. But, I mean, sadly,
So you need a
sadly
war
it's not
to
a joke.
actually-
Sadly, it's not a joke. So the point is, if you don't have that political sanity, I don't really know. And that makes me very pessimistic because sadly, the only thing that we have seen to work is give city the rights to do it, they do it, and then the market players react. It's unfortunately the only thing that has worked, which means that doing that on a broader scale, currently at least, there's no path. Because again, the ones who don't want this to happen have all of the keys in their hands to make sure that no such decision is ever voted in. In France and in Italy, we had plans before fiber started being deployed for all of the market players to co-invest in a neutral national fiber company with the government and have a national network equal, etc. In both countries, it was shut down by the incumbent. It never happened. So, you know, the models are there. We know how to do it. It's down to political decisions.
But this is a quite pessimistic view. Do you share this pessimistic view, Ulla and Crister?
Yeah,
He's
I
an
really.
optimist. He's not going to share my view.
Well, it seems to be optimistic, but I think the problem is Brussels, because the politicians and advisors and everyone else, they have so many things on their table, and I would say the broadband is not the first thing they
Number
consider.
73 indeed, yeah.
And it's supposed to be the capital of Europe. If you go there, it's really tricky to communicate.
There's no fiber. There's
No,
no 4G.
we have a colleague at the Commission. He have 2 different connections to his home, because when his kids come home, he can't work.
So it's not a very good example in this area.
And to go back to the historical story about telecommunication, communication of all kind have always been the most important driving force for the society. I mean, not only 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago. Why is Stockholm located where it is? And we have to consider those things, that communication will drive the society, no matter how you spell it. And today it probably spells fiber.
I would like to ask you about the different levels, but first I would like to invite you into the discussion. What are your questions to the panel? Yes, you get a microphone from behind there.
I have a question regarding if you put New Zealand into the context, Brussels, and then the public investment into fiber. Basically, you're asking Brussels to say that there's been a market failure. The market is not investing as much as you would like to see. So can you please advise us here from the panel? How do you see this, the big picture here? A market failure, politician investing in networks, or a structural separation? If you put these pieces together, it's quite a different situation compared to what is coming from Brussels today.
I would say it's also a political failure because the politicians don't understand what they have to do and what they shouldn't do. So it's very much...
It's not just market
No,
failure.
it's not market, because it's quite obvious that market tries to persuade politicians to pay for what they would like to do. But politicians should also understand what's actually their role, and that it's possible to provide an infrastructure without listening to the monopolists. And so it's more a political failure as I see it.
We are in the most fiber city in Europe. How much money had the government put into this network here? How much subsidies?
5,000 euros.
5,000 euros. If you tell anyone else that all over the world, they don't believe you.
Yeah.
But we have the facts.
Yeah.
That's very true. There's one thing, though, that we have to keep in mind is in the political system, the further removed you are from the citizens, the less you understand these things. The beauty of these networks is they have an immediate economic and social impact locally. Yeah. So locally, people understand that. That's
and
why
local
you hear
politicians are
yeah,
better.
that's why you hear a lot
yeah.
more mayors coming out and saying we need this than you hear MPs and EMPs even less, because they're so far removed from the guy who actually votes for them that commonality of interest is no longer there. So I think that's an issue, and it is a political failure, because no matter how high our representatives should be working for us, that's what the system is supposed to deliver.
So
But
Yeah.
I think that the storytelling is very important, because we are so used to having good access here in Stockholm. But when people come to Stockholm and they actually can see the difference and what we can offer here in Stockholm, this is something that's unheard of in most cities and most countries. So we all have to be better storytellers and also invite people to Stockholm in order to see what we actually have in an ordinary household, what capacity they have and what we actually can do more. And I'm also responsible for tourism, for example, and we have to be much, much better in order to tell our tourists what kind of services we can provide from ICT and broadband point of view, because we don't tell them that.
And also tell them that it's not the taxpayers who have actually paid for this.
No.
It's made by...
Oh.
Yeah. So you're talking about the members of parliament in Brussels not being close enough to the voters. We have an election coming up in May for the European Parliament. As a voter, can I do anything to get them understand this better?
Of course you can. Of course you can. You have to debate this with the members of the parliament, and we had a discussion the other day.
As a voter, that's not easy to do.
Well, we had a discussion the other day with a Swedish member of the parliament, Mr. Gigabit from Stockholm.
Yeah, but he's kind of convinced already.
No, it's just 500 left.
You need to have a debate with the guys who are not convinced, Chris, or not with the guys who already buy it.
Maybe it's the Frenchmen, maybe, or
Yeah, no,
the Italians.
I mean, it's a very tricky question you're asking, because if what you're asking is there a party I can vote for that will be in favor of this, then my answer is no. Because this is what we're back to. In Brussels, this is number 73 on the list.
Yeah.
And so that's not even going to be on anybody's platform. And the second thing, which kind of worries me, although I don't quite know how it's going to play, is we know we're going to have a third Eurosceptics in the next European Parliament. So, there's a point in the future where you could imagine that we have a non-European Parliament, which is kind of scary. But I don't know how that's going to play. What it means is, certainly attempts to unify Europe are not going to pass. So even what Commissioner Kroes is trying to get through now, which I don't think is really answering the issues we're facing, but which is a unified European regulatory landscape, there's very much doubt that this will even come through in this legislature, but it certainly won't in the next, because with a third of the parliament against it, nothing like that is ever going to come through. Now, if you empower local governments to do things through parliamentary action a bit more than it is today, then maybe these guys could vote for it, because it's not taking anything away from their ability to do things locally. It's actually giving them more ability to do things locally. I don't know, but again, we touched on Google Fibre briefly and how it affects the US market. And I'm very critical of the initiative as a whole, but I will give them that. It has forced the incumbents to do some things in some areas. Now, I would call it a success if AT&T had announced a nationwide 15-year fiber deployment plan.
Maybe it's coming up.
I doubt it, but if it does, I will, eat my reports and fully agree that I was wrong. So the question
Let us
is,
hope you will be wrong then.
there's two questions. The first question is, how do we get the incumbents to commit to nationwide deployment? That's one way, right? If that doesn't work, or if we determine it cannot work, then the second question is, how do we, the citizens, take back the incumbents' network and force it to upgrade? I don't think there's any other path. And right now, we're kind of vaguely following the first path and saying, if municipalities have the power to do the stuff, and if enough of them do it, at some point, the incumbents will go, wait a minute, every one of my profitable markets is going away. I need to do something. And then we'll have the infrastructure. We might not have the perfect competition, but at least we'll have the infrastructure. If that doesn't work, I think we quickly need to shift to the second plan and say, okay, we need to separate these things.
Crister.
Yeah, we need also to consider the role of the European Commission. They should collect all the information and give advice to the Parliament so they can vote. and they are really keen on being neutral. Everything should be technical neutral, financial neutral, and we are writing this guide at the moment and said, don't give any answers. You can tell them some questions to consider, but no answers. And I think that is a problem, that they are so neutral that they can't be clear in their communication.
Just one example of that, in all of the broadband targets that the Commission pushes, there is no upload component. Because if you put any upload target, only fiber can match it. So
then you're not
as long
neutral
as you're
anymore.
sticking to download targets, you're good, because copper can do heavy download. But only fiber can do heavy upload, therefore no upload targets, because otherwise we're not technology
So
neutral.
much for neutrality.
It's completely reverse thinking.
We do have several questions. Yeah. Yes.
My question was, all the pessimism about doing this at the European or even the national level. And I'm also remembering one of the earlier speakers was talking about how difficult it is to compare countries and how much easier it is to compare cities and to figure out how to do it on a city basis. And then I'm thinking of, whether you like it or not, the way that Google is going in and doing it on a city-by-city basis, and eventually can that be connected up? I mean, isn't there some kind of a picture emerging that if there is a future, it's going to happen by building locally and then connecting that up later in time? Or does that pose technical difficulties in the future which you won't be able to get over? Is the answer to get 15 other European cities like Stockholm and then start connecting them up and then...
Can I take very quickly? I mean, technically, the only issue is they all build different networks with different standards. When the time comes to make this a vaguely unified field, it's a bit complicated. But I don't think that's a major issue. The major issue is you're effectively telling everyone who doesn't live in the cities, sorry, guys.
The rural areas are...
And the problem is, the reason we had national networks was they were cross-subsidizing the expensive parts of the network with the cheap parts of the network. So if now you say, let's let all of the cheap parts of the network do their thing, you have no ability to finance the expensive parts of the network, which means either you're back to a monopoly, state monopoly situation everywhere else, which some might find a good idea, but we've kind of exited that in the 90s, so it would be a little strange. Or you're effectively saying rural people, well, you chose to be a farmer in the middle of the, too bad.
Crister.
We have 290 municipalities in this country. We are really a rural area. When we meet people in France and Spain and they talk about rural areas, I said, you haven't seen anything yet. I mean, go up to the north of Sweden, you can drive for an hour without meeting any car or see any house at all. Anyway, in nearly 200 of these 290 municipalities, we see local initiative, mainly from the municipals. And in some of these municipalities, with less than 10,000 inhabitants, 80% has fiber to the home. And how did they do that? Well, at least one person in every village has a digging machine. It's do-it-yourself. It's cooperative initiatives, sometimes supported by the government, sometimes
so you dig
not.
for your own fiber?
Yes.
Yeah.
There were no operators that was willing to do anything. So what could they do? They could see people moving to the larger cities or make it possible to work from home.
I totally agree with the idea. I don't think it's replicable to everywhere in Europe.
Of course not.
Because of
Because
regulation.
everybody doesn't have their own digging
Well,
machine.
there's that. There's
Not
mentality.
the independency that the Swedish cities do have.
The municipalities and the
But
cities.
there's rights of ways
independency,
issues. There's also just the spirit of entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
That's true.
it's I think it's very much in the national psyche here, and we hear the same thing in Norway. Digging. Yeah, I'll take my spade and do it. I'm not sure if you go to France, they're going to get into digging. Yeah, I'll pay someone to do it, maybe. But
You have not been very kind on your...
my countrymen.
No. You've been saying they're good on cheese, but nothing else.
Wine is okay.
Wine is okay too. Yes, please.
We're here celebrating a success story of Stokab and Stockholm. And from all the discussions we have here, it seems like Stockholm is now basically done.
No.
Exactly. That's what I'm looking at. What is the next challenge? What is the next step once you have it? The rest of you need to keep up the
Yes.
speed and
What's the next
come there.
step?
But what's the next step now? What is the
Next
future?
step for Stockholm, Ulla?
No, I think this is really important. We are not pleased and satisfied and leaning us back and doing nothing, because I think it's really important to continue to see to that we will actually hold this position whatever happens in the rest of the world. So we have to continuously work in order to be competitive and in order to develop new ideas. And that's why, well, for example, Kista is going to be a test bed for different kind of services, 5G and 4G and so on. And we think it's really, really important to continue to develop accessibility in streets, for example, was mentioned here before. That's what we are doing right now in Stockholm as well. And when we develop new areas, for example, the Stockholm Royal Seaport area, we also think about how to actually use the infrastructure, ICT infrastructure, in a better way in order to have smart houses and so on and so on. So this is a constant ongoing process in order to be even better. And from the city's point of view, within 2 weeks we will present the new Open Stockholm Award, where we actually open up more data bases for companies and civil ordinary Stockholmers to use the information in order to develop websites or services, apps or whatever. So I think this is, whatever happens in Brussels, we will continue. And if we will show people that what we actually are doing here, and we are of course welcoming all these smart people and companies from other parts of the world that don't have this high-speed accessibility, please come to Stockholm and develop your ideas here in Stockholm.
Crister, and then we'll have a final question.
Yeah, we have thousands of scientists and researchers that trying to see how we could continue to develop this society. We are now performing printed sensors so we can build this connected society in many different ways. And that would give us new questions. What are the congestion? What are the bottlenecks? How could we deal with that? So, I mean, everything we do something, there will be new challenges, new opportunities. And there is a lot of people willing to work with that.
If I can give a very quick outside perspective, when I came here in 2008 for the first time, the promise of the open access was being marketed a lot. Everybody was enthusiastically saying, we're going to have a huge diversity of services available on those networks. And to be honest, I'm still not seeing those services today. And this is, 5 years onwards, 6 years onwards. I think the challenge that Stockholm and probably Sweden as a whole has to face, and the rewards are enormous, but the challenge is to get from these pilots to actual working business models. Because if you crack that, every other country in the world will buy these services, and they will have been developed here first. But right now, I'm still not seeing that promise being actually in the market.
Up.
Yeah, or even, I mean, there are hundreds of pilots, and I can go to Acreo and they'll show me 100 products that will get me super excited, but they're all pilots. So how do you get from testing stuff to a workable product that people want to buy and has a working business model behind it? I think, to me, that is the next generation challenge.
Huge potential.
Yeah, it is, but we also have some really working business ideas, but we are not telling people about it. And that's one. Yeah, it's a lot of secrets out there that we have to.
Tell me to begin with.
Yeah, because I think that this is really, really important, because we have to tell people about what's happening here and show the new companies, show the new business ideas that actually is working. And we don't do that today.
So we're looking forward to hear more of the Stockholm secrets.
Yeah.
Do we have a last question for the panel? Well, I will pose a last question. Your best advice, we've talked a lot about the challenges and the problems on the EU level. What would be your really best advice to EU to accelerate the fibre network? rollout? Crister, you
My-
are advising the EU Commission. What's your best
Yes,
advice?
we are already doing that. And my advice, and I have told many people this in Brussels, you have to involve the local authorities. You have to involve the politics in the regional council and the municipal council. They have to set their own digital agenda. It has to be a political decision, so it is measured and followed every year. I guess that is important. Just to lean back and say, market will do this, you can wait 1,000 years for that.
It won't happen.
No.
So start on a local, regional.
Involve the politicians, make it as city planning.
Ulla, what's your advice?
No, I think it's important to look into the Stockholm business idea, of course, and ask yourself the question, how come that Stockholm today is a hype for a lot of ICT companies? How come? What's actually the reason? And because you can read articles in Economist, you can read articles in Financial Times, Wall Street Journals. There's a lot of articles about what's actually happening in Stockholm today. And
Well, your advice is basically to copy what
Yeah.
Stockholm has
Yeah,
been doing.
exactly.
That's a good advice. Benoît, what's your advice?
Well, and I'm going to take the opposite end of the spectrum. Much as I'd like to believe that the EU would be willing to involve the local communities, I don't think they are. So I think that. So I'm taking the opposite end. I'm
The
saying
pessimist end.
no. I'm saying that the Commission needs and the Parliament needs to very seriously consider the market structure as the core issue of what we're facing. And I think if they put that back on the table and discuss it openly, because right now it's not even being discussed, it's a complete taboo topic. If that's being discussed openly, I think members of Parliament will quickly perceive the benefits of that. Unfortunately, it's being so, locked down, exactly, that it's not even being discussed. And it's not incompatible. It's not incompatible with any of those two recommendations, actually, because I think the Stokab story totally pushes in that direction. And because you structurally separate doesn't mean you don't need to involve the local communities in the decision process of what gets deployed and where, even if they're ultimately not the ones who are doing the deployment.
So lots of good advices from the panel. Thank you very much, Crister, Ulla, and Benoît. Thank you.
Thank you.